Okay, so we're moving towards the tripolar world. So what does that mean? So when I say tripolar, and I'm really kind of piggybacking off an idea of Balaji, who's a social media, I don't know, social media influencer. He's a guy on the internet that has pretty smart, bright guy that has lots of cool ideas and good ideas about, our current world and the future. And he talks about the tripolar, world order. So let's back it up first. So what do I mean by tripolar? So I think to start this conversation, you really need to go back to Bretton Woods. So what was Bretton Woods? So Bretton Woods, after World War II, after the Allies and the Americans won World War II, they got together at a conference in Bretton Woods. And at this meeting, there was, world leaders. They essentially, since they won the war, the old world order had been wiped up by World War II. And now that the Americans and the Allies had won, the victors, I think there's a quote, to the victors goes the spoils. And part of the spoils of winning World War II or any war is that you get, essentially, since you're the victor, you get to make the rules after the war. So Bretton Woods was a conference or a couple day symposium of world leaders that got together to kind of essentially determine what the rules of the new world would be after World War II. So let's see. So this world order, the Bretton Woods, essentially what they did at Bretton Woods was, during World War II, a lot of gold in Europe had fled Europe, obviously because of the Nazis, because of Hitler, because of, the war. And people in Europe didn't want their gold being seized. So a lot of gold, which was stored in Europe, just made its way over to the United States. It was on the other side of the ocean. It was a safe place to stay, to store your gold, or at least, the threat of it being seized were a lot less than, say, if you were in Poland or Germany or somewhere that was being invaded. So during Bretton Woods, it made a lot of sense since all the gold had been for thousands of years, the reserve currency or the currency of the world. And it made sense, to tie that. Oh, you mean Nazi gold? Yeah. So yeah, Nazi gold. So it made lots of sense to since all the gold was pretty much in America, and I can dig up some. I don't have the statistics off the top of my head, but a lot of the gold in the world was in the U.S. So the leaders, it made sense to kind of tie the American dollar, set up the American dollar as the reserve currency of the world, and tie that to gold since all the gold was in the United States. So after World War II. The rules of the game were set. So the Bretton Woods Conference set up that the American dollar would be the reserve currency, and it would be tied to gold. So essentially, you could redeem, a U.S. dollar for $1 of gold or the equivalent. So this system, obviously, it worked at first, but as things go, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So in 1971, Richard Nixon, he temporarily unpegged the dollar to gold. This temporary fix is still in effect in 2024, over 50 years later. So in 1971, I think the Americans had been kind of abusing this system, and it got to the point in 1971 that Richard Nixon, he temporarily took the U.S. dollar off of gold temporarily. Said fix your camera. Which one, A or B? I'm going to try to use both these cameras. So kind of what I'm going to try to do is be reading off a screen, and B, and then if I'm just kind of improvising, talk off A. Thanks for tuning in, Mick. It's good to have another podcaster tuning in. My A. What's wrong with my A? I don't know. Maybe the feed looks good. I know the monitor and the. So where was he? So 1971, Richard Nixon, he temporarily took the dollar off gold. So kind of the U.S. since World War II has been the reserve currency of the world. So obviously, kind of as the system just slowly got momentum. Nixon took us off the gold standard in 1971, and kind of since 1971, essentially the U.S. dollar has almost been pegged to oil. So it's been the monetary, it's been the policy of the world that if you want to trade oil, you have to, buy it and purchase it in U.S. dollars. So kind of since the U.S. dollar's been taken off of gold, it's kind of been enforced by this, or its value, a lot of it has come from, essentially anyone internationally that wants to buy oil has to buy oil using U.S. dollars. And that kind of, I think, in my opinion, it has led to kind of this, this global military of, we've had this unipolar world of the U.S. dollar, or the U.S., being the supreme empire, and especially after 1990 when the Soviets fell, since 1990, it's really been the United States, which is the superpower. So I think just this one superpower has led to the U.S. having military bases all over the world. I mean, part of us patrolling the seas, and essentially, since the way it's set up is that you have to buy oil using the U.S. dollar, like our military is pretty much everywhere to enforce those rules. Um, so another big thing that happened that I think has implications is that Biden, he banned Russia from the SWIFT system. So SWIFT is an international money payment system. And essentially SWIFT, it's like this monetary banking. I mean, it's like I don't know, it's like what commercial banks or banks used in countries used to, transfer money. But essentially SWIFT is used by all these countries to move dollars around the world. So when Russia invaded Ukraine, part of our sanctions, or the U.S. sanctions, was to remove Russia from the SWIFT international banking system. So this was meant as like an economic sanction to hurt Russia economically. If they can't use the SWIFT system, a lot of their assets were kind of frozen or stuck, or they couldn't use the dollar. So it was meant to kind of hurt their economy and prevent further invasions or kind of retaliation against the war, which in the short term I think was a good idea. Russia invaded Ukraine, let's punish them, let's hurt their economy. The problem I see with this is that I think in the long term, that specific action, so Joe Biden in the U.S. removing Russia from the SWIFT system, I think in the long term will be bad for the United States. So the reason I think that is you already have countries, so Russia, China, Iran, lots of other countries that maybe aren't on that level. I mean, North Korea, those are obviously our enemies, but lots of countries around the world, the whole U.S. dollar system and having to buy oil in U.S. dollars, it doesn't really work for a lot of countries. I mean, even the whole current world order, I mean, even the United States, it doesn't work for all Americans. I think all Americans enjoy kind of the status quo of being the world superpower, but even within the United States, there's been certain demographics. Obviously, lots of elites, people in Washington, Ivy League types have, benefited, while the middle class and the poor have kind of been left behind in the United States. But in other countries, they haven't really been happy. They've always wanted a new system. And then now that the U.S. took Russia out of the Swiss system, you essentially forced them into the black market and forced them to create a new system. And my worry is that the SWIFT system, or removing Russia from the SWIFT system in the short term, hurts Russia, but in the long term, you've essentially now forked kind of the economic system to a U.S. system and then a Russian type system. So you've kind of already, set that in order to have a second system. So we have a comment. Russian economy already sucks before Biden did it. So yeah, the Russian economy was not good. But I guess my concern is that now we've literally, by taking Russia out of SWIFT, you've created a second system. And my worry is that this second system, many countries might start to prefer the second system, which would take power from the United States, specifically China. So Russia has now become a real trade partner with China, and China definitely hates the U.S. dollar system and wants more power. So if this system becomes more popular, so now if you're able to buy dollars and rubles or dollars, a lot of countries might actually start to prefer rubles. Which brings me kind of back to, so it's kind of the unipolar world we've been in since the end of World War II is, the U.S. system of dominance having the reserve currency. Which brings me to the tripolar world. So Balaji has a theory. He talks about, Balaji, he talks about these three different triangles, and let me try to pull up an image of it, which I don't know if it's right, but I think it's a good mental model to at least try to understand what's going on in the world. So Balaji, tripolar world. He has an axis like this, right? Like this. So up and down, you have authoritarian at the top and libertarian at the bottom. And then to the left, the economic left, and to the right, the economic right. So on that axis at the top, he has the CCP, or communist capital. And then at the bottom, towards the libertarian, to the economic left, he has New York Times, and to the right, BTC or Bitcoin. So his theory is kind of that we're moving towards this tripolar world of New York Times, or woke capital, will be the kind of the US, represents the U.S. establishment. CCP, or the communist capital, kind of represents the Chinese yen, or the new emerging system with China and Russia. And then the BTC, or crypto capital, is the third axis, which essentially represents Bitcoin and crypto. So kind of open source internet. So his kind of theory is that as this unipolar world is breaking down, this new system that is emerging is we're kind of moving towards three stronger poles of the US dollar, which will still be a thing. It just won't be the only thing. And the CCP, which is kind of the Russian China system. So he has communist capital, which is Russia, China, kind of that new system that's emerging. Woke capital, or the New York Times, he has kind of the American establishment. And then he has crypto capital, or Bitcoin is kind of, so essentially if you're not American establishment or Chinese Communist Party, crypto or BTC or kind of open source internet will be the third pole. So obviously there's not a nuance to it. Obviously we're in an ever-changing world, but I think just having that mental model of we're moving towards three different poles, or like, I think it's kind of easy to observe as Americans too, that this unipolar world, or the American dollar, the American, homogeny, I think that's how you say it, is breaking down. And what fills the vacuum? Who knows? But I think the theory of the tripolar world, woke capital, communist capital, and crypto capital, I think those are kind of make sense, because the American establishment is clearly going to be a thing. People are going to defend that. And the kind of the new Russian Chinese Communist Party, or essentially our enemies, is going to be a thing. And then obviously, if you don't want any of those others, Bitcoin or crypto is open source, so anybody can join. It's not closed to anyone. And his theory is kind of that those are the three new economic poles that we're emerging to. I subscribe to. I think obviously those three are going to be huge economic currencies moving forward. There could be other things too, because obviously it's changing. But I think just having general awareness that those three things, those three poles are emerging, I think is helpful to kind of understand our changing world. So that's the tripolar world. And let me know in the comments if you have any questions, or if that made sense, or if you'd like to kind of see me explore those topics. Even kind of the woke capital, he calls it the New York Times, because he talks about how, our media is part of the establishment. So kind of when he talks about woke capital or the New York Times, kind of the whole, essentially a broad term for like